Chapter 5. It was the craziest fight I've ever seen, Bill Hicks confidentially explained to a group of his friends in the bar of the Poodle Dog as he downed a glass of red liquor and brushed off the powdered snowflakes from his fur coat. He was a kind of slim, long-legged guy, that young actor fellow I guided down to Timmins, and he hardly said a word throughout the whole ride. I couldn't figure out what he was up to, except that he intended to knock someone's block off if he got the chance. I had a feeling he would probably succeed, the way his jaw was set and his eyes were blazing. But I had no desire to be that other guy, that's for sure. I didn't think he was a force to be reckoned with. Bill mechanically held out his empty glass and, getting more animated, tossed his discarded coat onto an empty bench, his eyes starting to light up with renewed excitement. But boy, he was. He was simply lightning fast, that kid, and the way he threw punches was impressive. I caught on to the situation gradually, as neither of us were great conversationalists. But before we reached Timmins, I understood most of it. It turns out that fellow Clinton, the big strange guy who played Damon, you remember, folks, was the boss of the show. He was the leader and held the money. Well, he and that guy they call Sprague jumped the train last night, taking with them all the cash they had been collecting for a week, and made a quick getaway to Denver, leaving all the other actors in a tough spot. This young man had somehow figured out what was going on, and let me tell you, he was furious. He was too angry to talk. And when they get that angry, it's time for the innocent bystander to step back. So he roped me in at Gary's barn to show him the old trail, and we had quite a wild ride that night. But folks, I wouldn't have missed being there for anything. It was an incredible adventure, let me tell you. We didn't see a trace of that Clinton or his partner until just before the main line train arrived going north. The train was almost 2 hours late, so it was already daylight by then, and we caught sight of those two guys running toward the station from the creek bottom where they had been hiding. They were both strong-looking guys, and I was curious enough by then to offer to hold one of them while the kid took care of the other. But goodness gracious, that wasn't his style at all. He politely told me to go to hell, and then walked out alone without a gun in his hand. He was pretty pale around the lips, but I think it was just anger because there wasn't anything weak about his voice, and the way he criticized that thief was impressive. Hey, I've heard some pretty fancy language in my time, but that kid had a monopoly on the dictionary for sure, and he scolded those two guys thoroughly. That tall Sprague, he didn't have any courage and held back without saying much, but the other guy tried every sneaky trick a thief knows, only to face obstacles every time. That young guy just tore into him. He called him every name I've ever heard, and then some, and finally, when the train was about to arrive, the guy took out his money and started counting out the 10s and 20s so quickly that I thought it was all over. But boy, I didn't know that kid, and neither did Clinton. Hicks wet his lips with his tongue, pausing, like a good storyteller, to calmly look at the faces of his listeners. I couldn't see exactly how much the guy handed over, but he was very hesitant and clever about it, and then I heard him say with a sneer, "Now, damn you, how much more do you want?" And folks, what do you think that actor kid did? Take the whole pile? Not a chance, he didn't. He just casually stuffed the money he had been given into his coat pocket and faced Mr. Manager. "Not a single penny, Clinton," he said in a soft tone. "I'm going to collect what you owe me right now." And by golly, folks, he sure did. I can't say I saw much of the fight except for the dust, but when tall Sprague pulled out a fancy gun, I instinctively smacked him on the knuckles with my .45 and tossed him into the group. Say, that was better than any three-ring circus I've ever seen. The kid, he bashed Clinton's head on the stage, occasionally amusing Sprague by kicking him in the shins, while I just wandered around aimlessly without seeing any particular reason to intervene. I reckon they would still be there if the train staff hadn't separated them and loaded the remains onto a carriage. And then that actor kid stood there looking first at me and then at the carriages. "Hicks," he gasped, "did I get $50 worth?" "I reckon you did," I said thoughtfully, "and maybe it might be 100. And then he laughed and brushed the dust off his clothes. "All right then," he said, "let's eat." And I never saw a nicer guy once he got that burden off his mind. Carlton, completely unaware that he had thus achieved a desirable reputation in certain rather exclusive social circles of San Juan, went straight to the hotel, briefly pausing in the restroom to freshen up, climbed up the stairs, and knocked energetically on Miss Ornish's door. He was still flushed with victory, while the natural confidence he felt in her appreciation of his efforts gave him a sense of excitement that was hard to conceal. The door was immediately opened, and with just one look, she could see the success of his mission written all over his face. Instantly, her eyes lit up with a smile, and she extended her hand in a warm welcome. "I can tell without a word being said that you found your man," she exclaimed, "and I am so glad." "Yes," he replied, stepping inside and emptying his pockets onto the white bedspread. "There is the money." She glanced at the pile skeptically. "What money?" "Why, yours, of course. The money you said Clinton owed you." She turned, somewhat embarrassed, and looked into his surprised face. "Do you mean that's all you got?" she finally asked. "Did he send nothing for the others? Didn't you know he owed money to every member of the company?" With these words, the entire situation became clear to him for the first time. He had only been thinking about Miss Ornish, and had allowed the deceitful manager to escape with most of his stolen goods. The realization of how easily he had been deceived made him angry, his face growing dark. She quickly understood the truth, and before he could explain, she gathered the loose bills into her lap. "Wait here for a moment, please," she said urgently. "I'll be right back." He stayed as instructed, wondering vaguely about her intentions, but her brief absence didn't give him much time to think. She met him at the door with a suspicious question. "What have you been doing? Surely you haven't given all that money away?" The girl smiled, a defiant gleam in her eyes. "Every penny of it. Why, what else could I do? They have nothing and they need to get back to Denver or they'll starve." For a moment he completely lost control. "Why didn't you tell me first?" he asked sharply. "Did you think I collected my own money and could cover your expenses?" He never forgot the expression that instantly crossed her face, the quick anger that came from the depths of her dark eyes. "I wasn't aware I had ever asked Mr. Carlton for help," she replied firmly, standing tall. "Your decision to follow Clinton was entirely voluntary, but I naturally assumed the money you brought back belonged to me. You said it did, and so I thought I could use it as I saw fit. You haven't shown any discretion. That seems to depend on your perspective entirely. Until I ask for your help, though, I don't want your criticism." Both voice and manner were so cold that they were equivalent to dismissal, but Carlton hesitated, already starting to regret the bitter harshness of his words. Under his steady gaze, her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. "We have been friends," he began more humbly. "Could you tell me something about your plans? Right now I can't offer you any help or advice." Her face visibly brightened as if she quickly liked this new attitude. "That sounds much better," she admitted, looking up into his face. "I've never enjoyed being scolded as if I were a child who had done something wrong. Besides, I am completely convinced that I did the right thing in this case. I think you would agree if you just had the patience to hear my story. I know exactly what I intend to do, or else I would never have given away all that money. I have an appointment." "An appointment? Where? Is there another group performing here?" She shrugged her shoulders, her hands clasped. "No, not in the way you mean. Not the legitimate kind. I'm going to perform at the Gaiety." Carlton stood holding onto the back of the chair, staring straight at her, his body still. For a moment he felt a sudden change of emotion, a vague distrust of her true character, a doubt about the real nature of this stubborn personality. Her decision shocked him with its recklessness. Either she didn't understand at all what such an action meant, or she seriously lacked moral judgment. Slowly her shadowed dark eyes looked up at his face, as if his silence had made her feel alarmed. Yet she just smiled at the seriousness of his expression, shaking her dark hair in a flirtatious manner. "Once again, it seems like you disapprove," she said with a show of indifference. "How easily I managed to surprise you today. Seriously, a stranger might think I had some special obligation to ask for your permission just to live. We've seen each other for only 2 weeks, and yet your face already shows disapproval. Clearly you don't like the Gaiety." "No, do you?" "I," she replied uncertainly, subtly shifting her body in a way that spoke louder than words. "There are times when necessity rather than preference must dictate our choices. But honestly, since you're asking, I don't like the Gaiety. It's too noisy, too dirty, too flashy, and too old-fashioned. But then again, beggars can't be choosers, you know. I'm not a dazzling star. I'm not even a mining engineer with a bank account in Denver. I'm just a relatively unknown professional actress, temporarily stuck, and the kind person at the Gaiety is offering me $20 a week. That's my answer. The young man blushed deeply, clenching his teeth. There is no kind person at the Gaiety. The very atmosphere of that place would tarnish an angel's wings, he passionately exclaimed. Besides, you're not forced by necessity to make such a choice. There's another way out. As you subtly suggested, I am a mining engineer with a bank account in Denver. I would willingly write a check tomorrow and cover your expenses back to that city if you would just accept my offer. Does that seem fair? Absolutely fair. But what if I refuse? And deliberately choose the Gaiety instead? Yes, and deliberately choose the Gaiety instead. What happens then? She calmly asked this pivotal question, her mouth tense, her eyes daring him to tell the whole truth. He moistened his dry lips, realizing that he was being pushed into a seemingly harsh bluntness he had genuinely hoped to avoid. Then, he responded with a calm seriousness, I'm afraid such intentional action would make me lose respect for you. She turned pale immediately upon hearing these unexpected words, her fingers gripping the door, her eyes filled with physical pain as if he had struck her with a clenched fist. Lose your respect, she repeated, her slender figure trembling, her voice shaky. I would rather forever lose my own if I were to accept your offer of money. Her posture straightened, a slight blush appearing on her cheeks. You completely misunderstand my character. I have never been accustomed to hearing such words, Mr. Carlton, and I don't believe I deserve them now. I choose to earn my own livelihood, and I maintain my self-respect, even if in doing so I unfortunately lose yours. But, Miss Ornish, do you realize what the Gaiety is? Not being devoid of all my natural powers of observation, I certainly believe I do. We were there together last night. She puzzled and confused him, seemingly trivializing matters that he considered to be of utmost seriousness. However, he possessed a stubborn determination that would not easily admit defeat. Miss Ornish, he began firmly, and in his earnestness he touched her hand where it still clung to the door. I may be presuming on a very short friendship, but my only excuse must be the genuine interest I have in you, particularly in your undeniable talent and future as an actress. It is always a great misfortune for a man to place trust and confidence in a woman's character, only to suddenly awaken and discover he has been deceived. Under these circumstances, I would be unworthy of friendship if I failed to speak plainly. Your reckless acceptance of this opportunity to perform at the Gaiety seems incredibly degrading to me. It diminishes every ideal that I have previously associated with your character. I am not prudish, but I admit to having held you to a higher standard than others I know, and it's difficult for me to accept my obvious mistake. However, I doubt you fully understand what you are choosing. I was with you last night, yes, but I didn't consider it an honor to be on that stage, even with the heart of the world, and it pained me to see you in such surroundings. But willingly participating in the regular variety show is a much more serious matter. It's almost a complete surrender to immorality, and it involves constant association with vice, which goes against true womanhood. Surely you don't know the true nature of this place? Then explain it to me. I will, without sugarcoating it. The Gaiety is connected to the Poodle Dog Bar and the gambling establishment upstairs. They are so closely linked that I could hear the sound of gambling chips and glasses clinking on stage last night. One man owns and controls the entire operation, and he hires any kind of talent for his variety show that will please the immoral crowd he caters to. Any questions about morality are completely ignored. Did you understand this? The young woman nodded slightly, her face serious like his own, and her pale complexion contrasting with her dark hair. I understood those conditions completely. And yet you agreed to perform there? She adjusted her slightly messy hair and looked directly into his eyes, her determined expression evident on every line of her face. Mr. Carlton, first of all, I reject your right to question me in this manner or pass moral judgment on my motives. I happen to have a conscience of my own, and your presumption is almost insulting. While you were away chasing Clinton, the manager of the Gaiety, after learning about our difficulties, came to see me with a proposition. It seemed like a respectable offer and was presented in a courteous manner. However, I declined at the time because I had no desire to appear on that stage, especially in such an unpleasant setting. I decided to wait for your return and find out if sacrificing my pride was necessary. Now I realize my duty and I'm not afraid to fulfill it, even if it displeases you. I am going to perform the final scene from the play Heart of the World, and I believe it will not harm my audience in any way. I do regret that the Gaiety is connected to a bar. I would much prefer not to perform there. Unfortunately, it's the only place that has offered me work. I may have to let go of some false pride in order to accept, but I will never compromise my integrity as a woman. You had no reason to even suggest such a thing. Maybe not. But if you were my sister, I would have said the same. Certainly, because you see this situation solely from the perspective of the polite society, from the viewpoint of social respectability, where the opinion of others governs every action. I used to think the same 2 years ago, but circumstances have changed my perspective. Professional necessity cannot always be so particular. It cannot always choose the nature of its surroundings. A nurse must care for the injured, no matter how unpleasant the task. A female journalist must cover her assignment, even if it takes her to unsanitary places. And an actress must fully embody her character, regardless of any previous biases. The woman who consciously chooses this life must, sooner or later, adapt herself to its unpleasant requirements. And if her womanhood remains true, the superficial criticism of others cannot greatly harm her. I had 3 options in this case. I could selfishly accept my small amount of money, go to Denver, and leave these other helpless people here to suffer. I could accept assistance from you, a relative stranger, or I could help them and earn my own way by taking on an unpleasant task. I chose the last option, and my sense of right supports me. Carlton watched her earnestly as she spoke, his gray eyes brightening with unconscious appreciation, his face gradually losing its harsh disapproval. A spirit of independence always appealed to him quickly, and this girl's outspoken defiance of his good opinion made his heart beat faster. Behind her outward calm demeanor, there was an untamed spirit coming to life. We may never completely agree on this question of proprieties, he acknowledged slowly. Yet I can partly understand your perspective as seen professionally. Am I then to understand that your future is definitively decided? Do you really intend to dedicate your life to dramatic art? She hesitated, her eyes quickly looking down, showing a moment of embarrassment. Yes, she finally answered. I am starting to discover myself, to believe in myself. Do you expect to find complete satisfaction in this path? Complete? Oh no, one never achieves that, you know, unless possibly the ideals are very low, but more than I can hope to find elsewhere. Even now I am certainly happier in the work than I have been for years. She looked up at him quickly, her eyes pleading. It is not the glitz, the pretense, the applause, she hurriedly explained, but the actual work itself that attracts and rewards me, the hidden effort of accurately interpreting character, the hard, private study of details. This has become a true passion, an inspiration. I may never become the perfected artist of which I sometimes dream, yet it must be that I have within me a glimmering of that art. I feel it, and cannot remain false to it. Possibly love may enter to change your plans, he dared to suggest, influenced by the constantly changing expression of her face. She blushed to the roots of her hair, yet her lips laughed lightly. I imagine such an unexpected occurrence would only serve to strengthen them, she replied quickly. I cannot imagine any love so supremely selfish as to hinder the development of a worthy ideal, but really there is little need yet of discussing such a possibility. She stood aside as he made a movement toward the open door, yet when he had stepped out into the hall, she stopped him with a sudden question. Do you intend to return immediately to Denver? No, I will stay here. She said nothing, but he clearly understood a further unasked question in her face. I remain here, Miss Ornish, while you do. I will be among your audiences at the Gaiety. I do not completely agree that your choice has been a correct one, but I truly believe in you, in your motives, and whether you want it or not, I intend to be your special guardian. There is likely to be trouble at the Gaiety if any drunken fool becomes too cheerful." With flushed cheeks, she watched him go slowly down the staircase, and there were tears shimmering within those dark eyes as she retreated into the room and locked the door. For a moment she remained gazing at her reflected face in the little mirror, her fingers clenched as if in pain. "Oh, why doesn't he go away without my having to tell him?" she cried unintentionally aloud. "I thought for sure he would this time." Chapter 6. A wide protruding wall of rock, uneven and steep, completely blocked the view towards the wider valley of the Vila, as well as the town of San Juan, which was barely 3 miles away. Beyond its stern protection, Echo Canyon stretched harsh and desolate, extending far into the heart of the gold-filled mountains. The canyon, an indistinct scar on the side of the great hills, was deep, long, undulating, constantly twisting like a massive serpent, its sides darkened by clinging cedars and clusters of shrubs, and rising in irregular steps of partially exposed rock towards a narrow strip of blue sky. It was a fragment of untouched nature, as untamed, somber, desolate, and silent as if it had never been explored by humans. A small, clear stream danced and sang over scattered stones at the bottom of this grim abyss, constantly winding and curving from one wall to the other, mostly hidden from sight by the dense growth of overhanging bushes that cast their shadows over its banks. High up along the brown rock wall, the afternoon sun cast a warm and golden glow, but further down within those gloomy and forbidding depths, only a purple twilight lingered, while patches of white snow still clung desperately to the steep hillsides, or cascaded in powdery clouds from the laden cedars whenever the unsettling wind blew through the gorge. Early birds were starting to move from tree to tree, singing their greetings to the late arrival of spring. A fluffy cloud lazily floated high above, providing a deeper backdrop to the narrow strip of sky above. It all came together to create a natural scene of ancient tranquility, made particularly solemn by the vast ranges of towering mountains, and even more deeply impactful due to the eerie silence and solitude, the apparent absence of human life. However, in this aspect, the scene was most deceiving. Neither peace nor solitude dwelled among those dark rock shadows. The dominance was that of primitive men, fighters reduced to almost pure animal instinct by the ongoing hardships of life, the relentless pursuit of wealth. The wandering path, deeply worn between rocks by the constant flow of people and pack animals, ran closely alongside the singing water. Here and there, barely noticeable trails branched off to the left or right, ascending the terrace slopes as directly as possible until they disappeared completely among the low-growing cedars. Each of these trails led straight, as nature allowed, to specific locations where men tirelessly labored for the precious gold, protecting their claims with loaded guns as they dug deeper and deeper beneath the enigmatic rocks, forever in search of the world's great treasure troves. Countless centuries were being rudely unlocked through the incessant toil of pickaxes and shovels, the green hillsides torn apart and disfigured by ever-growing piles of debris, while determined men with eager eyes frantically struggled to obtain the hidden wealth within the rocks. Here and there, roughly constructed log cabins perched precariously on the edge of precipices, silently telling the tale of a claim, while in other places only the smoldering remnants of a campfire hinted at basic living. Yet everywhere along that higher terrace, where in some areas the enticing streaks of gold lay partially exposed to the sun, those same gaping holes leading far below the surface could be found. Around them, the small figures of men toiled like Hercules under the relentless drive of hope. On this elevated ledge, just beyond a shallow intersecting ravine shaded by the low cedars, 2 men reclined on a pile of rocks, casually gazing 600 feet straight down into the dark depths of the canyon below. Just beyond them stretched the dark opening of their mine shaft, the simple pulley system outlined against the gray backdrop of rock, while somewhat to the left, seemingly hanging over the cliff's edge, sat a small log cabin that served as their home. This was the Little American Claim, owned by William Hicks and Stutter Brown. The two partners sat in silence, a single rifle resting between them on the pile of debris. Hicks was tall, thin, with a weathered face and twinkling gray eyes. He had a goatee that swayed as his restless jaws moved. Brown, 20 years his junior, was a young, sandy-haired giant, slow in speech, movement, and thought. He had freckled cheeks and a small, reddish mustache. They had been painstakingly deciphering a lengthy and poorly written letter, causing the irritable stutter to utter disjointed curses. His blue eyes glared angrily across the ravine, where several figures dressed in blue and red shirts were clearly visible near the mine shaft of the Independence, the claim just below theirs on the ledge. However, neither man spoke at that moment. Finally, shifting uncomfortably but clearly determined to take action, Hicks broke the long silence. "I've been thinking it over, Stutter, all the way walking out here," he said, continuously chewing on his tobacco. "But I figured you should see the letter first, since you're an equal partner in this claim. It seems to me that the lawyer has given us the correct advice, and there's no other way to gain an advantage over those troublesome fellows over there." He gestured towards the distant figures. "You see, it's like this, Stutter. You and I could swear, of course, that the damn jerks had changed the stakes on us more than once, and there's no doubt in our two minds but that they're following our lead right now, before we can get down to it. Hell. Of course they are. They got the first start, and the men, and the money behind them. We ain't got a damn thing but our own strength, and the rights of it, which don't amount to anything. For about 3 weeks we've been watching those pathetic cowards take out our mineral, and for one I'm going to quit. I never did submit to that kind of thing, and I'm too old now to begin. The lawyer says we don't have any legal proof, and I reckon it's true. But I'll be damned if I don't get some. There isn't a mining engineer in San Juan that will come up here for us. Those guys have them all under their control. But I reckon if we search long enough, we can find some guy in Colorado with enough courage to tackle this job. And I'm going out looking for just that man." He got to his feet, his stubborn old eyes wandering across the gully, and the younger man watched him with slow curiosity. "How far are you going, Bill?" he burst forth stutteringly. "Denver if I need to," was the elder's determined response. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Stutter. I'm going to withdraw every damn cent we have in the bank down in San Juan. It's not much, but I reckon it has to do the job. Then I'll set out and search until I find a mining engineer who's got a soul of his own and enough guts behind it to uncover the facts. I've been prospecting through these mountains for 30 years, and now that I've found something valuable, I refuse to sit back and let a group of dishonest gamblers steal it from me. No way. If I can't secure a deal with the person I want, then I'll go back and confront that Farnham guy in San Juan. I think I'll go and tell him that before I leave." The old man's determined expression became evident, his weathered hand firmly resting on the grip of the Colt pistol hanging from his hip. "You stay right here, Stutter, on the mining site, and don't let any of those sneaky individuals step foot on our claim, even if you have to eliminate them completely. You and Mike can handle that, and you can bet I'll have some news for you when I get home, my boy." He turned around and walked back along the ledge to the cabin door, re-emerging shortly after with a small package in his hand. "There's enough food in there to last you and Mike for another week, and I'll be back before then, or else I'll be buried. Goodbye." Brown sat up, his gun resting between his knees, and silently watched his partner descend the steep trail. It was difficult for him to engage in conversation, so he only spoke when necessary. He could swear fluently, but even that form of expression seemed insufficient now. Finally, the older man disappeared into the shrubbery, and besides the distant figures near the Independence mining site, the tall blond man appeared to be alone. However, Stutter had long ago become accustomed to solitude. The only thing that troubled him was a lack of things to do. He quickly scrambled to his feet and climbed up the mound until he could lean over and peer into the dark opening of the uncovered pit. "Did you manage to fill up your bucket, Mike?" he asked, projecting his deep, sputtering voice down into the depths below. "I certainly did," came the irritated response from the darkness. "You pitiful scoundrel, haven't I been shaking the rope for 20 minutes? I thought maybe you had run off and left me to rot down here. What's the matter now, you freckled-face elephant?" Brown cautiously looked around, then stuck his youthful face further down into the safety of the hole before offering an explanation. "Bill has gone to find an engineer with enough nerve to operate our equipment," he managed to say in a stammering manner. "He said he would go all the way to Denver before giving up, and if he doesn't find anyone, he will come back and drill into Farnham." "By Jove!" A hint of unrestrained delight evident in the sudden exclamation. And was he determined? He certainly was. He meant business and had 40 rounds of ammunition on him. "Here we go, Mike." And Brown grabbed the twisted handle of the pulley system and began slowly winding the heavy rope around the strained drum. He brought the large ore bucket to the surface, dumped its load of rock over the edge of the pit, and let it swiftly descend to the waiting Mike. However, a slight noise behind him made Brown spin around suddenly, his hand instinctively reaching for the discarded but ready rifle. For a moment he stared in disbelief at the unexpected sight before him, his face quickly reddening with embarrassment, his eyes uncertain and puzzled. Just 10 feet away, a woman, dressed rather brightly and seemingly at ease, sat on a rather small pony, her red lips curved in laughter, clearly amused by the surprise she had caused him. Brown realized that she was young and attractive, with jet-black curly hair and eyes of the same color, her skin unusually white and clear, while she rode in a masculine manner, her lower limbs delicately covered with buckskin leggings. She had carelessly dropped her reins upon the high front of the saddle, and as their gazes met, she laughed openly. "You really scare me, sir, and you're so big. It makes me happy." Her imperfect English was oddly charming. "Oh, no, not all Americans find me so terrible." Stutter Brown clenched his white teeth together fiercely, his short red mustache bristling. He was quite young, never quite accustomed to being around women, and strongly opposed to being laughed at. Besides, he felt acutely aware of his speech shortcomings. I was expecting a different kind of visitor," he stuttered desperately, in explanation, every freckle standing out prominently. "And I thought maybe someone had caught me off guard." The girl only laughed again, her black eyes sparkling. Yet under his steady, questioning gaze, her face slightly sobered, a faint blush becoming apparent in each cheek. "You speak so strangely, sir. You're as big as a tree and say words that way. It makes me forget and laugh. You must not care only about me. Oh, well. But it was always a fight with you, wasn't it, sir? Pow, bang, kill, very bad." And she clapped her gloved hands together sharply. "But not me. I was just a girl. No gun, no knife to see. I just want to know more about my American. You show me how it works. Understand?" Stutter seemed puzzled, doubtful. "Mexican?" he questioned, kicking a piece of rock with his heavy boot. "Yes, sir, but I speak English very well. I'm Mercedes Morales, and I admire the brave Americans very much. I also like red hair, sir. In Mexico, it's all the same color as this." And she shook out her own curly black locks in a sudden shower. "I think the red hair was more beautiful." Mr. Brown was not accustomed to having his rather fiery hair referred to in such an open and admiring manner. It was a topic he felt sensitive about, and despite the young girl's honest expression, he couldn't help but doubt the sincerity of her words. "Like fun you do," he grumbled uneasily. "Anyway, what are you doing here?" In response, she promptly swung one neatly booted foot over and gracefully descended to the ground, revealing her slender figure. The most striking feature about her was the deep blackness of her eyes. "Yes, I'll tell you all that very quickly, sir," she explained honestly, tapping the rock pile with her riding whip and bending over to peer curiously into the gaping shaft hole. "I rode out from San Juan for what you call a leisurely ride, such a word, sir. And I wandered up this trail. You see, it was quite steep, so steep that I almost slid off. But the Mustang managed to climb the hill just fine, and that's when I saw you, sir, and knew there was a mine here. Not a large mine, mind you. I'm not interested in that kind, but just a little mine where I wouldn't be afraid to go down. Then I looked at you, so big with your beautiful red hair and kind face, and I thought you might let me see how the brave Americans dig out the yellow gold, sir." She flashed a tempting glance up at the man, and Brown nervously stamped his feet, trying to appear stern. "I couldn't hardly do it, miss. It's too dirty down below for someone like you. Besides, my partner isn't here, and he might not like it." "You have a partner? Who is the partner?" "His name is H. Hicks." She clasped her hands in an ecstasy of unrestrained delight. Bill Hicks? Oh, sir, I know Bill Hicks. He's a very nice guy, but not as attractive as you. He's an old man and swears a lot, Holy Mother, how he swears. He once told me to come out and see his mine. I didn't know where it was before. Maybe the angels will show me. You're what Bill calls Stutter Brown, I think? Ah, now it's all right, sir. Good. She gently placed her gloved hand on the rough sleeve of his woolen shirt, her black, appealing eyes suddenly flashing up into his troubled face. I must laugh, sir. Such a brave American afraid of a girl. Why don't you shoot me? Afraid of nothing. Stutter's freckled face instantly turned as red as his admired hair. But I tell you, miss, it's all dirty down there and not suitable for a lady to walk around in. The temptress, never doubting her power, smiled most enchantingly, her hands expressive. You're a good boy, just as I thought. Look, I'm wearing this old coat, and then I'll lift the skirt like this. I'm not afraid of the dirt. Now, what do you say, sir? Good? Speaking like this, she grabbed the discarded and somewhat disreputable garment, threw it casually over her shapely shoulders, shrugging them flirtatiously, her big eyes shyly looking up at his relenting face, and quickly began to fasten her already short dress, disregarding the exposure of her trim ankles. The agitated Mr. Brown coughed, his uneasy glances straying down the open pit. He would have gladly and promptly shoved the cold barrel of his Colt under the nose of any man in such a moment of trial, but this young girl, with a glance and a laugh, had completely disarmed him. A troubled conscience, a feeling similar to disloyalty, troubled him, but the temptation left him unable to resist those captivating black eyes. And yet, in this moment of uncertain decision, that teasing hand once again lightly rested on his shirt sleeve. Please do that, sir, the voice low and pleading. It wasn't much to ask for you to let a girl see your little mine. What harm, sir? But maybe it's because you don't like me. Surprised by such an unfair suspicion, the eyes of the young giant instantly showed interest, causing her own eyes to suddenly light up, her red lips parting in a quick, appreciative smile that revealed her white teeth. Ah, I see it wasn't that. It makes my heart glad, makes it sing like the birds. Now I know it will be as I wish. How do I get down, sir? Thus easily persuaded from his last weak defenses, his heart fluttering at the seductive glance, the embarrassed Stutter surrendered unconditionally, a gruff curse growling in his throat. He leaned out over the dark hole, his supporting hand on the drum. Come up, Mike, he called, rattling his keys like castanets. I want to go down. There was a sound of falling rocks below, a fierce shaking of the suspended rope, and then a muffled voice shouted an order, Hoist away and be damned to you. Brown devoted himself diligently to the creaking windlass, although never able to completely divert his attention from that brightly dressed, slender figure standing so close to his side. For one brief second he vaguely wondered if she could be a witch, and he looked secretly aside, only to see her bright eyes smiling happily at him. Then suddenly a completely bald head shot up through the opening, a wrinkled face the color of parchment, with squinting gray eyes, peered suspiciously around, while a gnarled hand reached out, grabbed a post for support, and pulled out into the sunlight a short, sturdy body. Mike straightened up, with a peculiar jerk, on the dump, spat angrily over the edge of the canyon, and pulled out a short, black pipe from a convenient pocket in his shirt. He made no audible comment, but stood, his back against the two onlookers, and Stutter cleared his throat loudly. This lady wants to see how we mine, he explained in painful embarrassment, and I thought I'd take her down if you'd work the pulley a bit. Old Mike turned slowly around and faced the two, his squinting eyes on the girl, while with great deliberation he struck a match along the leg of his canvas pants. Anything to help you, he said gruffly. Always ready to help the ladies. I've married 3 of them already. And was this Hicks's others, Stutter? No, not exactly, Brown admitted with evident reluctance. But you see, she's a great friend of Bill's, and so I think it'll be all right. Don't see how any harm can be done. The pessimistic Michael slowly blew a cloud of strong-smelling smoke into the air, sucking hard at his pipe, and put his rough hands on the pulley handle. None of my damn business, begging your pardon, miss, he condescended to mutter in slight apology. As long as the pay continues, I'd just as soon work on top as down below. Hoist the woman into the bucket, you oversized dude! Stutter Brown, still nervous from recurring doubts, awkwardly helped his lively companion find secure footing, anxiously instructing her to hold on to the swaying rope tightly. He stood there, carefully stabilizing the line as it slowly disappeared, mesmerized by those amazing black eyes that continued to gaze up at him until they vanished into the darkness. Leaning over to listen closely, the young miner heard the bucket touch the bottom, and then, after a quick word of caution to the man holding the handle, he swung himself out on the taut rope, descending rapidly, hand over hand. Mike, still grumbling huskily to himself, waited until the windlass stopped vibrating, securely locking the handle with a strip of rawhide, and calmly sat down, gripping the pipe stem tightly between his teeth, his eyes already half closed. He had a stubborn, obstinate face, marked with lines and wrinkles, the bright sunlight making the leathery skin and the intricate network of wrinkles around his eyes and mouth more visible. Since he wasn't paid to think, the old man contented himself with dozing, confident that he wouldn't be disturbed any time soon. And he was right. The two were underground for a whole hour, while above them, Mike leaned against the windlass, his back comfortably supported, completely content, and the tethered pony peacefully grazed on the short grass along the ledge. Then, the brooding silence was suddenly shattered by a voice emerging from the depths of the shaft, and the vigorous shaking of the dangling rope made the windlass vibrate sharply. Old Mike, with deliberate movements, put away his pipe, untied the rawhide, and completely indifferent to everything else except his necessary task, slowly pulled the woman to the surface. She was beaming, her eyes shining with the thrill of the extraordinary adventure, and she quickly climbed out of the hanging bucket without needing assistance. Before Brown reached the surface, the woman had safely caught the wandering pony and effortlessly mounted it. Straightening his broad shoulders in surprise as he emerged, his face flushed, his lips firmly set, the young man placed restraining fingers on her gloved hand. "Do you really mean it?" he asked eagerly, as if fearing that her decision might have changed already upon returning to the daylight. "Can I visit you at the location you mentioned?" She smiled sweetly down at him, her eyes filled with undisguised admiration for his impressive physique and sincere, youthful face. Yes, sir. By all means, why not? It is I who should be afraid that you might forget to come." "You needn't worry," he stammered, blushing. "Miss, I will never forget this day." "Who knows? Poof, neither will I, but for now, goodbye, sir." She lightly tapped her pony's side with the whip, and as she stood motionless, Stutter watched them vanish over the sudden drop. Once she shyly glanced back, giving a seductive wave of her gauntleted hand, and then suddenly disappeared from view as she descended the steep trail. Old Mike lit another match and held the tiny flame to his pipe bowl. "And you caused quite a commotion today," he remarked thoughtfully, his eyes glowing somberly. The younger man abruptly turned and faced him. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said, Stutter. You're quite the character, aren't you? That's the Mexican dancer from the Gaiety in San Juan, no less. And I bet you, my boy, that Mr. Farnham sent her here to spy on us. It would be just like that sneaky guy, and I hear they're quite close." And Stutter Brown, his large fists clenched in anger, looked out into the dark valley below and, forgetting his speech impediment, swore like a man. Chapter 7. The not-so-gentle orchestra at the Gaiety was playing with a liveliness that made hearts race, while the tightly packed audience, barely breathing from the intensity of their awakened interest, were focusing their eager eyes on a slender, red-robed figure, surrounded by a misty cloud of delicate gossamer, her black hair and eyes standing out vividly against her clear white skin. She completely surrendered herself to the strange movements of her unconventional dance. The expansive stage was flooded with yellow light, and she was the epitome of graceful motion. This was her third encore, but just as wildly bizarre as ever, her voluminous skirts shimmering in the spotlight, her nimble feet barely touching the polished floor. Her youthful, flexible figure, as light as a fairy, moved in perfect harmony with the music, as the tireless Mexican performer leaped and spun, wheeled and twirled, at times seemingly floating in the air. Her bare white arms stretched out, her eyes shining with exhilaration in this moment of supreme triumph. Alyssa Ornish, elegantly dressed for the street, had already finished her more reserved performance, but she paused for a brief moment of curiosity in the shadow of the wings, gazing out at the figure in red, darting around like a tropical bird amidst the vibrant stage lights. Carlton, patiently waiting for 20 minutes in the darker recesses just inside the stage door, observed the young girl's unconsciously captivated expression, pondering both himself and her. This entire experience remained an unsolved enigma to his bewildered mind, how she managed to hold his interest, and why he couldn't fully detach her from his life. He tried to envision her as just an ordinary actress, someone he could casually flirt with tonight and easily forget tomorrow. Yet for some reason, his mind refused to accept such a notion. There was something about the serene, feminine countenance that shone through the reflection of bright lights, something in the poised figure leaning forward with excitement, which demanded his respect, stirred his admiration. She was not an ordinary woman, and he couldn't ignore that fact. Even the flashy, cheap surroundings, the glitz and glamour, the noise and aggression had completely failed to tarnish Alyssa Ornish. She stood out, unique, a fully blossomed flower, uncommonly beautiful despite blooming in a filthy environment overrun with harmful influences. Carlton was acutely aware that some special essence of her true character had mysteriously infused the entire place, elevating her modest stage performance, and had already left an indelible impression on those rough, rowdy Western souls in the audience. Even before she uttered a single line, she had won them over, her innate purity of womanhood and clear purpose shielding her from any indecency or insult. The mocking laughter, the impudent shuffling of feet, the slightly intoxicated unease, all ceased as if by magic. And as her simple act unfolded, the silence in the audience became almost sacred, the startled faces reflecting a newfound awakening to higher ideals. It was a triumph that far surpassed the raucous applause that greeted the Mexican dancer, a moral victory over uncontrolled lawlessness achieved solely through her genuine femininity, unassisted and alone. That earlier scene had given Carlton a deeper understanding of this girl's talent, a renewed appreciation for the true value of her regard. No matter the inner struggles he might face, he could never again diminish her in his private thoughts to the level of ordinary. The lively notes of the dancer's accompaniment concluded with a resounding blast of triumph, the ecstatic fans in the audience shouting her name above the deafening applause, while, flushed and breathless, the nimble Mexican dancer gracefully retreated into the dimly lit wings like a vibrant scarlet bird. "Ah, America!" she exclaimed, her eyes still ablaze with excitement, positioning herself directly in front of her silent observer. "Miss, it's not the same as yours. They like you, yes, but they love Mercedes." Miss Ornish smiled kindly, her gaze on the other person's flushed, childish face, and reached out her hand. "There appears to be enough space for both of us," she replied pleasantly, "yet your dancing is truly amazing. It's an art, and you must let me express my gratitude." It's difficult to understand why, but the wild, passionate girl, somehow stung by these calmly spoken words of appreciation, immediately straightened her slender figure. "You never forget that you're not one of us, do you?" she asked bitterly. "Pa, maybe you think I care about your preferences. I dance because I love to, because it ignites my passion. I don't care for all your airs of being a refined lady. I deeply regret that you feel this way. I certainly spoke with kindness and appreciation. May I pass, please?" The angry young Mexican swept back her red skirts in disdain, her bare shoulders held high. She didn't know why she felt so vengeful. She couldn't have explained the reason even if she tried. Yet deep within her passionate heart, she harbored a hatred for this white, silent American, whose every word seemed like a reprimand to her. She stood there, still watching suspiciously, smoldering dislike burning in her dark eyes, when Carlton suddenly emerged from the hiding shadows with an unexpected greeting. She noticed the sudden flush appear on Miss Ornish's cheek, the quick lifting of her eyes, and the almost immediate lowering of her lashes, and quickly understanding it all, she stepped forward just enough to get a clear view of the young man's face. The next moment the two had disappeared into the night. Mercedes laughed unpleasantly to herself, her white teeth shining. "Ah, merciful mother," So my very fine lady has already found herself a lover here. Damn, and he is well worth looking at. I will ask the stage manager for his name. Outside, under the faint glimmer of the stars, Carlton offered his arm, and Miss Ornish accepted it silently. It was just a short walk to the hotel, and the street at that time was quite empty, so the young man keenly felt the obvious awkwardness of his companion. It seemed unnatural to him, and he felt inclined to attribute her state of mind to the unpleasant scene he had just witnessed. "Miss Mercedes doesn't seem to be very friendly towards you," he ventured. "Have you already quarreled?" "You mean the Mexican dancer?" she asked, glancing at him curiously. "Honestly, I don't remember hearing the girl's name mentioned before. Do you know her?" "Only from what is announced on the posters, and from seeing her dance from the front row. She is definitely a true artist in her field, the most skilled I have ever seen. What has made her your enemy?" "I really don't know." Her words were a complete surprise. I was too shocked to even be offended. I have never spoken to the girl until tonight, and then I only said a sincere congratulations. She is extremely pretty, and it's quite unfortunate that she has to live such a life. She doesn't seem older than 17. He looked at her in surprise. "Such a life," he repeated recklessly. "So you actually feel sorry for others while remaining completely indifferent about yourself?" "Oh, no. You greatly misunderstand, or perhaps deliberately misinterpret. I am not indifferent, but there is a very big difference, I'm sure. This girl chose to be at the Gaiety. She practically told me so. She loves that kind of life. Probably she has never experienced anything better, while I am simply dealing with a bit of bad luck, and within 2 weeks at the most, I will be free again. Surely you cannot suggest that we are on the same level." "God forbid," fervently. "But I sincerely wish you didn't feel the need to stay even for that short period of time. It shocks me to realize that you are closely associated with such immoral individuals. You must be aware that I am willing to provide you with financial assistance if you would just end the whole thing." She looked up at him with a reproachful expression. "Yes, I know. And perhaps you are justified in feeling that way according to your standards. But I don't believe I am being influenced by these wicked associations, nor do I feel any compromise of my moral values. I am doing what I believe is right under the circumstances, and I have already made my final decision and explained my reasons to you. You mentioned such immoral individuals. Are you referring to this Mercedes? Strangely enough, I confess to having an interest in this beautiful Mexican girl. What do you know about her?" The young man impulsively started to speak, but quickly paused. An instinctive fear of uttering those straightforward words that he would rather she never hear caused him to soften his language. "There isn't much discretion at the Gaiety," he explained casually, "and spreading gossip is part of its advertising strategy. As for Senorita Mercedes, my only source of information is common hearsay from the crowd. That connects her name quite familiarly with one of the owners of the gambling rooms." "You have no concrete evidence of this?" "None whatsoever. As I mentioned, it has reached me in the form of common gossip. The man in question is the special expert in the game of Pharaoh, a guy named Farnham." Miss Ornish reacted strongly, her fingers gripping his arm as if to prevent herself from falling, her face suddenly turning pale. "Farnham, did you say? Which Farnham?" "I believe he's often referred to familiarly as Biff." "Here? Here in San Juan? Biff Farnham here?" The startled words seemed to get stuck in her throat, and she stood there staring at him, her slender body swaying as if he had physically struck her. "Oh, I never knew that." Carlton, shocked and taken aback by this unexpected outburst, remained silent, his face slowly becoming hardened by the suspicion that had been suddenly aroused by her agitation and impulsive exclamation. She must have taken immediate notice of the expression in his eyes, because with an effort she faced him again with regained composure, only a slight tremor in her soft voice indicating her lack of complete self-control. "Your information certainly startled me greatly," she said slowly. "It was so unexpected, and so much has happened recently that has affected my nerves." They walked on in silence, and as he dared to glance at her sideways, unsure of his next move, her eyes were lowered and hidden behind her drooping eyelashes. "And is that all?" he asked. "All? Well, what else is there?" He clenched his lips, trying not to show his impatience. "Nothing, of course," he calmly agreed, "if the lady prefers to remain silent. However, given the current circumstances, the outcome may result in an unpleasant misunderstanding." They had now reached the bottom of the few steps leading up to the entrance of the hotel, and Miss Ornish, removing her hand from his arm, stood before him, outwardly composed. "Without a doubt you're referring to my apparent surprise upon hearing Mr. Farnham's name mentioned for the first time?" He nodded quietly, once again captivated and disarmed by the revelation in those dark eyes. "The explanation is quite simple," and his voice carried a hint of noticeable coolness. "I happened to know this guy a bit when I was in the East before he became a gambler. Obviously, I don't know him now and have no desire to, but it was quite a shock to hear that he was actually here, and everything else that came with it. Is that clear enough?" The young man wasn't satisfied, and his face clearly showed his true feelings. However, there was something about her restrained demeanor that kept him respectfully silent, making the hesitation between them almost painful for a moment. Miss Ornish, realizing the new danger, weakly fought against the sudden temptation to fully trust this new friend, confide in him completely, accept his offered help, and escape any potential trouble. But pride proved to be stronger than fear, and she firmly closed her lips, determined. "Mr. Carlton," she said, her eyes unwaveringly meeting his, "I find myself compelled to be frank with you, something I had hoped to avoid. It was never my intention for you to pick me up at the theater tonight." "Really?" His surprised tone clearly showed the sudden sting of being hurt. "Yes, but please don't misunderstand me. It's incredibly difficult for me to say this, and I even prayed that you would leave on your own, without me having to be rude. I appreciate your kindness, your gentlemanly behavior. I value our friendship greatly, maybe more than you'll ever realize. But trust me, there are reasons why I can't let you continue to be with me like this. It is for your sake, as well as my own, that I am compelled to speak so honestly, and I am certain you will not exacerbate my pain, my embarrassment, by asking for a more definite explanation." His heart pounding like crazy, Carlton stood still, staring at the girl's appealing face, suddenly realizing her true significance, and fully awakened to a realization of what she had truly become to him. The idea of losing her, perhaps losing her to someone else, seemed to freeze his very soul. "Certainly I will respect your secret," he replied, controlling his voice with effort. "I understand when I am caught off guard. What is it you want me to do?" He couldn't see the sudden mist of tears clouding her eyes in that dim light, but she raised her gloved hand and brushed them away. "It's not easy to say these things, but I must. I want you to leave. Go back to Denver," she exclaimed. Then, all at once, her strained voice broke into a small sob. "I can't bear your presence here." That last impulsive sentence broke through his restraint, and for a moment he forgot everything except that thoughtless confession. She could see it in his face and quickly extended her hand as a warning, but he only held it tightly in his own. "You can't bear it," he exclaimed in passionate eagerness. "Then you must care for me. You must love me, Alyssa." "No, no!" Her eyes were filled with agony, and she tried to free her trapped hand. "Oh, please, I beg of you, please. You hurt me so. I won't allow you to speak those words. Please let go of my hand." He released his grip, feeling confused, ashamed, vaguely aware that he had acted ungentlemanly, yet deep within his own heart, certain that he felt no remorse. "Do you mean that?" he asked vaguely. "Yes." And all the previous trembling had vanished from her clear voice. "I never thought you would ever say such a thing to me. I didn't give you any permission to speak those words." "My own heart gave me the permission." Maybe the woman in her was defeated. Maybe there was an indescribable hunger within her soul that made her long to hear the forbidden words just once from his lips. "The permission, you say?" "What permission?" "To tell you that I love you." She took a quick, trembling breath, the vibrant color rushing to her cheeks, her gloved hands clasped over her heaving chest as if to calm the intense pounding of her heart. For a moment she stood motionless, trembling from head to toe, even though he couldn't see anything. Her lips formed a smile. "Oh, really?" she said playfully. "And how nicely you said it. The only son of Colonel Carlton, the wealthy banker from Denver, has feelings for Miss Ornish, the actress, and she, of course, feels very grateful. Alyssa, stop. His voice was earnestly indignant. It's not that. You must know it's not that. I only know it's extremely ridiculous, she replied more coldly. But if I didn't believe you were speaking somewhat honestly, I would consider your words a deliberate insult and treat them accordingly. As it is, I prefer to see your speech as evidence of temporary insanity. Ned Carlton confessing his love to Alyssa Ornish. Why, you don't even know my real name, the story of my life, or if I'm even deserving of your friendship. Love. You love me, an actress in a small-time company, a performer at the Gaiety. What would they say back home? I understand you. Ah, but you don't at all. Her voice grew steady and serious. That's the whole problem. You don't know me at all. I'm not even what you imagine me to be. I'm a fraud, a cheat, a masquerader. Know me. If you truly knew me, instead of expressing love, you would despise. Instead of seeking, you would flee. Oh, let's put an end to this charade once and for all. It is as painful to me as it is to you. Promise me, Ned Carlton, that you will come back to Denver. She teased, tempted him even as she openly rejected him. He fought desperately against a nearly overwhelming desire to vehemently deny it, to offer his whole life unreservedly to her. Yet something in the girl's determined face steadied him, made him perceive her decision as unchangeable. Alyssa, won't you listen? No, not another word. You don't believe me. He noticed the quick, restraining gesture of her lips, the turbulent rise and fall of her chest. Yes, I believe you, she conceded, almost wearily. You mean it now, but it's impossible. I want you to leave. For a moment, Carlton stood facing those dark, radiant eyes, and all his inherent strength as a man rushed back to support him. In that moment of intense determination, he understood that this woman had become his entire world. That one fact would never change. It struck him as a clear revelation untouched by either despair or hope. It was simply an unchangeable truth, which he must confront as fate dictated. He came from a lineage of fighters, and the apparent obstacles on the path to success did not discourage him. They only served to inspire him to greater efforts. Unfortunately, I am currently unable to leave, he responded more calmly, because I have already accepted some professional obligations here. However, I promise not to bother you again with my presence until... He hesitated, uncertain about his next word. Until what? You give me permission. She reached out her hand. You speak with so much confidence, he said casually. People often act recklessly in situations where even the most courageous would hesitate, and I now declare myself a firm believer in miracles. Your faith is about to be severely tested, she warned. I welcome that. But if we must part ways, at the very least, let us remain friends. You don't hold my words against me, do you? The faint blush returned to her clear cheeks, and she couldn't meet his questioning gaze. No true woman can ever be completely indifferent, she admitted honestly, or fail to feel kindness in her heart for someone who has shared such a story with her. And I am a woman. Their hands briefly touched, warm and pulsating, and a silent understanding passed between them. Then she withdrew her fingers and opened the door. Goodbye, she whispered, the word hanging in the air like a sweet fragrance, and disappeared just as he was about to step closer to her. Chapter 8. Carlton continued to stare blankly at the closed door from which she had swiftly disappeared, his mind filled with uncertainty. He definitely didn't intend to say what he had said out of desperation, but he didn't regret a single word. The realization that he truly adored this woman he had only known briefly had suddenly come over him, and now that he fully understood this fact, he surrendered completely to the inevitable. For a moment, thoughts of her overshadowed everything else. He saw nothing else in the world worth pursuing. Every awakened impulse was thrilled by Alyssa Ornish's beautiful face and gentle voice. He was not a quitter, not someone who lacked courage in love or in battle, and he was now too deeply committed to accept a rejection that lacked any sting, especially when her smiling eyes contradicted her words so openly. Whatever inspired the utterance of such words of cold renunciation, it was definitely not indifference or dislike. He forgave the lips, only remembering the eyes. With his hand still pressed against the porch railing, the young man suddenly remembered Biff Farnham, his cool gray eyes instantly hardening, his lips pressed together. What role did that disreputable gambler play in the past? What connection did he have, whether honorable or dishonorable, with Alyssa Ornish's previous life history? He had no doubt in her, as Carlton was naturally loyal and unsuspecting of those he once trusted. However, he couldn't remain completely oblivious. It was impossible to completely ignore the fact that there was once some connection. Her attempt at explanation, which was both laughing and clearly embarrassed, didn't deceive him in the slightest. Beyond that, there was her quick surprise at the mention of the man's name, the suddenly pale cheeks, and the evident fear in her dark eyes. The complete truth could be found there, not in her later deliberate attempt to mislead his suspicions. This thought was unpleasant, and Carlton's sensitive face flushed as his gaze uneasily wandered down the midnight street. For the length of a block, or maybe more, where numerous tents and low wooden buildings stood empty, everything remained dark and silent. However, just beyond that, the many-colored lights of the lively poodle dog glowed brilliantly, and he could even hear the loud band playing in the faraway dance hall. This sight and sound motivated him to take action and make a composed decision. If he truly intended to successfully navigate this situation, he needed to learn more about its circumstances. Furthermore, he now had two very good reasons to want to get to know this man Farnham better. The fellow had crossed paths with him twice in the past 12 hours. For this purpose, there couldn't be a better time than the present. He struck a match against the rough railing and lit a fresh cigar for himself, his handsome, determined features calmly illuminated by the flickering flame. Almost instinctively, drawing on his experience from the Wild West, he discreetly pulled a revolver from its resting place at his waist and conveniently slipped the weapon into the side pocket of his loose jacket. He had heard stories about the man he intended to find, and it would be wise to be prepared for any unexpected situations. The crowded bar room of the Blazing Poodle Dog was filled with men standing at the long, messy bar, men sitting around rough tables, and men casually lounging in groups across the heavily sanded floor. Glancing at them with little interest, Carlton paused for a brief moment, his eyes fixed on a whirlwind of dancers in the hall beyond. It was a scene of wild revelry, but in his current state of mind, he cared little for its rustic charm and quickly turned away. He ascended the wide staircase, which echoed the inviting sound of ivory chips clicking and the excited voices of those engrossed in gambling. The rooms above, both in size and extravagant decor, were a sight to behold. A dazzling display of lights, a cacophony of sounds, and a constant stream of people. Yet there was an underlying tension of anticipation that filled the air, captivating and electrifying. The dull murmur of indistinguishable voices persisted, occasionally interrupted by the sharp, penetrating tones of the scattered dealers announcing various turns of play, or the occasional curse muttered unnoticed by desperate lips as a losing hand was revealed. Carlton, accustomed to witnessing such scenes, casually glanced at the different groups of players, indifferent except in his search. He pressed forward through the buzzing, exhilarated crowd, paying little attention to the many faces in front of him. He knew that Farnham played faro, and therefore made his way directly through the spacious main room, completely indifferent to everything else. Eventually he found his desired destination near the far end of the large room, where a dense and hushed crowd had gathered around the faro table. Slowly, he managed to squeeze through the outer circle of players until he stood just 10 feet away from the dealer. Leaning against the wall, he occupied the narrow space between them. Before him stood a slender, well-dressed individual with sharp, clean-shaven features, appearing to be around 30 years old. This man exuded an air of aristocracy, maintaining perfect self-control with cool, calculating eyes and swift, decisive hands during the game. For some inexplicable reason, the observer became increasingly fascinated by the dealer's commanding composure. The dealer did not seem entirely human. Rather, he resembled a flawlessly calibrated machine capable of thinking and strategizing, yet devoid of any emotional response, much like tempered steel. There were no noticeable changes in his completely impassive face, no brightening of his cold, observant eyes, and not even the slightest movement of his tightly pressed lips. It was as if he wore a mask that concealed every natural human emotion. Twice, Carlton, carefully observing from his advantageous position slightly behind, thought he saw the dealer select the wrong card with his slender white fingers. However, the dangerous maneuver was executed so swiftly and calmly, without any shift in gaze or muscle twitch, that the skeptical observer began to doubt the accuracy of his own sharp eyesight moments later. As the final fateful card silently emerged and was deliberately turned face up, accompanied by bitter curses reflecting the crowd's disappointment, a young woman suddenly appeared from around the corner of the long table. She brushed against Carlton with her flowing dress as she passed by, leaned down, and whispered a rapid succession of sentences into the gambler's ear. The hands, already skillfully shuffling the cards for another round, barely paused in their movements, nor did those composed, observant eyes once leave the sea of enthusiastic faces in front of him. He asked a brief question, casually nodded at the hastily spoken reply, and then, as the woman silently walked away, Carlton looked directly into the surprised black eyes of Senorita Mercedes. Instantly she smiled cheerfully, showing her white teeth. "Oh, sir," she whispered seductively, leaning towards him. "So, my lady, the American, let you leave early tonight." Surprised by her recognition, he didn't respond immediately, and the girl gently touched him with her hand. "Sir, women of my background are never so cold. Try me sometime, and you'll see." With a joyful laugh and a flirtatious lift of her dark eyes, the dancer quickly disappeared into the crowd like a flash of red flame. For a brief moment, Carlton's admiring gaze followed her, aware only of her dark beauty and graceful figure. He was young, easily influenced, and there was a rare enchantment about the girl that momentarily captivated him. His attention returned to Farnham, remembering the serious purpose that had brought him there. The gambler was silently playing out his hand, as emotionless as ever. If he had noticed anything unusual, if he was considering anything beyond the game, no one could have discerned it in his impassive face and expressionless eyes. He seemed like a mere automaton, the only sign of life being his white fingers skillfully dealing the fateful playing cards from the box. The impatient, excited crowd facing him grew restless, cursing or laughing with each swift turn of the game, but the one who held their attention remained silent and unsmiling, his face remaining fixed and unchanging, as emotionless as a statue. Suddenly, he glanced meaningfully to the side, and silently nodding at a mustached man lounging next to the dealer, he swiftly stood up from his seat. The other person immediately joined the game, his hands protecting the remaining cards, while Farnham stood behind the chair for a moment, casually observing. There was no noticeable disruption to the game, and when the final card emerged smoothly from the silver box, the unruffled player turned away from the table, ignoring the chaotic struggle around him, the swearing and commotion, and faced the younger man who was still leaning against the wall. "Mr. Carlton?" he calmly inquired. Taken aback by this unexpected attention, the other man nodded silently in acknowledgement of his name. A faintly sarcastic smile appeared on Farnham's thin, tightly pressed lips, while he casually ran his hand through his slightly wavy hair. "I would like to have a brief conversation with you in private," he politely explained. "There is an available room we can use this way." Astonished but willing to find out the reason behind such a request, Carlton obediently followed the other man through the crowd, noting the slender straightness of his advancing figure, the squared posture of his broad shoulders, and the confident demeanor with which he cleared the path. Without any formality, Farnham pushed aside a heavy curtain with a brocade pattern, glancing questioningly into the smaller room that was revealed. It contained a square table and 6 chairs. 3 men were seated inside with their feet raised, calmly smoking. The gambler calmly scanned their expectant faces. "I would like to use this room, gentlemen," he calmly announced. "You will find plenty of empty space outside." Whether the 3 men recognized the speaker from previous encounters, or were sufficiently convinced by his stern expression of the potential consequences if they were to hesitate, they promptly stood up and exited the room in a single file. Farnham politely gestured towards the vacated space, displaying a slight hint of deference in his modulated voice. "Please have a seat, Mr. Carlton, and allow me to offer you a fresh cigar. It's a pretty good one, I think, as I happen to be quite particular about the quality of tobacco." They sat there for a moment, discreetly studying each other's faces across the table, amidst the growing clouds of smoke.